Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Steve Edwards.
Yo, coming out here from a beautiful, sunny Portland area.
We also have Dan Shapir.
Coming to you from the always sunny Tel Aviv.
So nice.
Yeah,
sometimes it is.
nice.
Sometimes it is very much on the warm side of things.
Yeah, next week I get to visit my boss down in southern Arizona where it's going to be like, 100 Fahrenheit average.
Yeah, it's been getting up to 95, 98 here. This is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. Thankfully it's not that humid. Kind of like in Arizona, it's not that humid.
Right, the dry heat.
Yeah, but it's still not fun to go sit outside in. We have a special guest this week, and that is Anthony Campolo. Anthony, do you want to let people know why you're famous? And I think we've had you on before, so maybe you can refresh our memory there too.
What's up, everyone? It's my third time here. I originally came on to talk about Redwood and then talked about Slinkity, a now completely unknown framework that basically made 11D like Astro. And then everyone just used Astro and stopped using 11D. So no one cares about that project anymore, but it was fun. And now I am building an AI app that I kind of vibe coded, maybe, depending on how we define that term. So, we're going to be talking about that. And super excited to be back and to chat with you all.
So I got to tell you, before we get started, when I first saw your name, I thought of somebody else because back when I was growing up, there was a famous Christian speaker named Tony Campolo.
Yes.
And I was going to ask how many times you got confused for him.
I think this might be the first time ever. Usually
Really? Okay.
It's just it shows up when you search, my name. So that's why, my handle is AJC Web Dev, and that's the same everywhere. So that's an easy way to find me online. If you just search my name, you get Tony Campolo, but no one I've ever talked to has ever really known who that was before. So this might be the first.
He was, when I was growing up, he was quite well known, at least in the church circles that I traveled in. So,
well, pulling us
dancing
back
around his office before you showed up, and then he was like,
I didn't know he coded.
Pulling us
I
back
didn't know
towards.
He coded too.
I'm trying to pull us back to tech. I'm trying to pull us back to tech. So, Anthony, you're on our show because of a while ago, I actually posted on X and also on Blue Sky kind of a shout out for people to come and speak about vibe coding. And you were kind enough to answer my call. So let's start with that. What is vibe coding?
Yeah, I love this term because it's one of those examples where the term came around and I felt like it defined something I was already doing. So it gave me the ability to explain to people more easily because this term already existed that I can kind of point to. So the term itself was invented by Andrej Karpathy, who's an extremely well-known researcher in AI. He's worked with a lot of the big companies. And this was in February of 2025. So it's a fairly new term. The way he defined it, he said, this is a direct quote, there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. He then kind of goes on and gives an example. I asked for the dumbest thing, like decrease the padding on the sidebar by half, because I'm too lazy to find out specifically how to do it, by like looking it up and having to apply it to your project. So for me, the most important thing is that you do the majority of your workflow through the interface of an LLM by telling it what you want your project to do or how you want your code to change, and then having it write the code. There's a couple more kind of levels. Some people will say it's only vibe coding if you're like speaking and you're not typing, but I don't think those distinctions really matter that much. I think it's more so where you are not directly writing much code. The few times you would be if it writes you some code and it has some sort of error you have to fix. You can either do it yourself if you know how, or you can feed the error back to the LLM and have it then try and fix it with new code, which would be kind of a fully iterative vibe coding cycle. So that's probably how I would define it. I first started coding like this, I think around the middle of 2023 is when I first tried doing this, and I've been doing it for a while. And back then, you still had a lot of skepticism around LLMs, especially from a lot of senior devs. They would say it hallucinates a lot, it writes buggy code, it writes insecure code, no one should ever depend on an LLM for their code. That's obviously changed a lot. people are more open to this idea now. So be curious how you guys see the term.
Well, as somebody who likes to know the details and the underlying code and know how everything works behind the scenes, that makes me cringe just thinking about it.
So I have to jump in here because I've done kind of both, and I'm a little curious where you draw the line, because I have some friends that are not programmers at all, right? And so to me, they're kind of having the pure vibe code experience, because it spits out a whole bunch of stuff with funny syntax that they can't make heads or tails of, and they run it, and then they literally just hand it the error back and say, now it's doing this, and then it says, oh, well, change this, and they'll eventually get to something that in a lot of cases works. Now, there are variations
or seems to
works.
Yeah, or seems to work.
Well, in some cases it does what they want. Now, does it do it efficiently? No. Is it pretty code? Hell no. Right? But it does the thing, right? At least to their satisfaction. But then when I'm using the AI, a lot of times, I don't know. I've used Cursor, I've used Copilot, I've used Grok, I've used ChatGPT just on their own to get it to write stuff, and it becomes more of a blend, right? Because if it throws an error, I'm like, oh, I know how to fix that. And so then I'll go in. Sometimes I'll even tell the LLM, I fixed this error with this. Okay, thanks for telling me. Here's some more stuff. Mm-hmm. And so is that vibe coding where I'm like, I'm half the solution on my own? Or I don't know. That's kind of what I'm wondering, because, if you have a competent programmer that can, shortcut a lot of the feedback on it, and just make it run or quickly clean stuff up, is that vibe coding or is that not vibe coding?
I would think it's more vibe coding than not vibe coding. To me, the more important thing is, did you start by prompting an LLM to give you the initial code? That to me is really kind of the important thing. What you do after that to try and fix the error, whether you're doing it yourself or you're having the LLM do it, I think that has more to do with kind of experience levels and just what's going to be more efficient and faster for you. But for me, the bigger thing is that the majority of the code is being written by the LLM.
Gotcha.
By the way, taking it from the other direction, if let's say it was 10 years ago and you had a product manager or a UX specialist sitting alongside the developer and telling them what to do, would that have been considered vibe coding?
From the perspective of the PM or whoever, it's a similar thing. And this is one of the things that makes LLMs such a huge deal for not just developers, but really for non-developers also. I want to also just throw in one more thing real quick. To make this actually work, you have to do a couple things. You have to have some sort of iterative way of actually testing the code, preferably with written tests or, just some sort of flow where you go click through a couple boxes and make sure it works. Because if you don't have that, or if you're trying to change a bunch of code that changes too many things that you can't test efficiently, then you're just kind of trusting the LLM. And that's the thing that you don't want to do. Going back to what Steve said, you do still want to have some sort of guarantee that your code is doing what you want to do. So you could have it start by vibe coding you some tests that you will then run after it gives you the new code. That's like a really, really, really important thing that doesn't always get brought up.
I want to jump in on this too, because people get worried about, is it going to hallucinate in the same way on the tests? It's a different prompt, and so it probably won't. But anyway.
It will hallucinate, but it would be different hallucinations. And if you get incompatibilities between the two, at least you know that you have at least one problem, potentially two.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, so you have to make sure the test corresponds to what you actually want the application to do. So you got you have to actually do it and then run a test and make sure they go with each other and it is working the way you think it should.
So how do you test these sort of things? Let's say, like, what am I writing? A test script, some code for Playwright? What am I creating in this test script?
It depends what you're writing. The way I first started doing this and what I found was a really good, efficient way to do it was by building CLIs. So for me, I started with using Commander.js, and I was trying to create a flow that would download a video, extract the audio, run transcription, add a prompt to the transcript, feed that to an LLM, and then get a response back to do things like generating show notes or chapter titles for podcasts and things like that. And so I would have a command that I would want it to be able to execute to do a thing. I would have it write the code. I would then run the command, and the command would do what I want or wouldn't. So I was kind of treating the command itself as the test. And then that would always then give me logs based on how the command went, which would include the errors. And I wouldn't necessarily have to write a standard test file to test it, because the command itself would be the test.
But does that mean that, but that means, if I understand your description correctly, that you're effectively manually testing it. I mean, you're running a certain script, but then you are the one who's actually checking to see that you get the expected results.
Well, it's still it's automated because you wrote a test. The test itself is going through steps that you would manually do yourself. But like I said, it's like an end-to-end test.
Yeah, it's not an end-to-end test. Yeah, that's what I was aiming for. So yeah. So vibe coding, I guess, is because the system is so dynamic and everything is changing so rapidly, you're effectively also kind of acting as, to an extent, the manual QA for what you're developing.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And as much as you can build in ways where the system can QA itself, you should. There's always going to be at least some sort of points in time where you have to step outside and actually just like try it and see if it works or not. So I think these are a lot of the same kind of issues that we get just with testing in general. Like, what's an efficient way to test and what's not?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, when I've done it, I just load it in the browser and just click around. And then I'll vibe code it and prompt it for unit tests. But it really does depend on what I'm building, because sometimes that's not the right way to do it if it's, completely command line based or something.
By the way, code in what do you usually generate, Anthony?
What do I, in terms of like what LLM am I using, or?
No, what you're using the LLM to generate code. Is it React code, straight on DOM code, jQuery code, HTMX code?
Yeah.
No.
What are you generating?
A lot of stuff. Like I said, I first started by building a CLI, and then I extended that functionality to a back end and front end, which have gone through many different tech stacks. I was a big framework guy, so I'm always kind of trying out different tools. My current stack, in terms of what I'm deploying the AutoShow app with, which is the app I vibe coded, is Astro with Solid as the templating language and Tailwind for the styling. And so that's basically the back end and the front end. I've done stuff with like a Node.js Fastify server. I've done stuff with React. Really any kind of popular technology that has a lot of usage and a lot of docs will probably do pretty well. Some people say you should always use Next.js and Supabase, but like I think as long as you're not trying to use something really obscure and really new, it tends to work pretty well. If it is very obscure and very new, you should create like just a single file that kind of has all the docs in it and drop that into the context of the LLM. That will kind of help shortchange that issue.
I think these days you also have various MCPs that make it very easy to get content off of GitHub, for example.
Yes. Yeah. MCPs add a whole nother level to things for sure.
Yeah.
But
so
I am
when
curious,
you're using the LLM, I just was curious because you're asking about the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing this with like Copilot connected to Gemini or GPT or Claude, or using something like Claude Code, or how are you doing that? And I'll also point out that Copilot, if you put it into agent mode instead of, I can't remember the other mode, it'll actually put the code into your IDE for you. And so I'm a little curious, like what level are you working at there?
Yeah, so I've tried Copilot and Cursor. I've tried Claude Code. I've tried, things like Bolt and V0, I think is what Vercel's thing is called. And then like when you have the agent loop, like you said, where it's actually changing your code for you, that is the full vibe code experience. Like that is Steve's worst nightmare for sure. So I tend to...
It's kind of nice.
It can be very, very nice. Yeah, totally. I think for like personal projects, that's definitely what I would do. I have a flow that some people consider kind of strange and inefficient. I had used this tool called Repo Mix, which is a way to kind of intelligently take your code base and smush it into something that is small enough to fit in the context of these LLMs. And then it also includes instructions of how I want my code to be styled and written. And then I just write what I want to do as a line at the bottom of that whole thing. and then I plop that into either ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini. I use all three, kind of depending on which one is going to work best. And then it gives you the output, and then I put it into my file. And as I'm doing that, I'll quickly kind of look over the code and I'll look at the diffs. So I'm not doing a pure vibe coding experience, that I am paying attention to my code, because I'm doing a production app that has, payments and login and stuff. So that gives me a step to kind of slow down, look at the code that's being written, look at what is changing in my project, get a sense of what's happening, and then I can then test it and see if it works.
So do you generally, when the LLM is suggesting stuff, do you usually approve it one by one, or do you just approve it all and then look at, I don't know, the Git diffs or whatever?
So I plop in all the changes that it gives me, and I tell it to write codes files in full. So I just click copy paste for each of them. And the way my projects are structured, usually it only has to change a handful of files to make the change if it's atomic enough. And then after I put all the files in, I'll then look at the diffs on each of those files. So if there's 3 files, I'll just go click over to the diff viewer on VS Code, kind of look at all those, and then I'll test the application with either a test script or just clicking through.
Now, you mentioned that you use the project itself as the context, or put it in the context, in order to obviously create consistency within the code base.
Yep.
First, consistency is only worthwhile once you have some code, and also assuming the code is structured the way that you like it. So do you also manually create or have created some sort of rule files or something along these lines as kind of a starting point or a way to keep aligning your code with a certain desired outcome?
Yeah. So with Repo Mix, it includes an instructions file that gets appended to each one. And in there, I have things like how I want the logging to be done, JavaScript kind of styling. So always using imports, not, require.
Kind of like cursor rules.
Yeah, they're exactly like cursor rules. Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think everyone should have those, and they should make sure to get down in writing how they actually want their code to look and behave, and the coding styles that they want, for sure.
So for me, it's interesting. So I'm working on several legacy projects at work they are definitely legacy, but they're still very much undergoing development by several developers. And I introduced the rule files into all of them. And it was a very interesting experience for me. In a lot of ways, it was my first real encounter with prompt engineering, you might say. So first of all, it was really odd for me, being an old timer in tech, to effectively write configuration as English in a markdown file, rather than in JSON or YAML or anything that you normally would expect configuration to be in. It's a very strange experience the first time you do it. Like, instead of saying, ESLint : on, you say, I want you to use ESLint. It's a very odd experience. But the other thing that obviously was a very significant thing for me was seeing how seemingly very small changes that I would make in the rule files could have very significant impact on the generated code. And it wasn't always very trivial to totally understand why. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, for me, the rules came around very iteratively, where I was working a lot with the LLMs. So it was generating a lot of code, and then there would be a lot of times where it would be doing something consistently that I didn't want. And then every time that would happen, I would write a rule. And then I would make sure that rule actually changed the thing I wanted to change, didn't change anything else. So you kind of need to do this. It takes some time. There's really no shortcut to doing it. And you have to just kind of get familiar with the LLMs and how they generate code. And when you're changing your rules, it's another kind of iterative process where you get the outputs, you see, are they what you want? Tweak the prompt if it's not what you want. And once you get it to where you want, try not to mess too much with your rules file.
Yeah. So just to finish that point, Chuck, for me, what I literally did was I started without any rule files. I would pick a file, let's say, that was in a style that I didn't like, and literally gave just the one command, refactor. Saw what got generated, then put in some rules, did it again, saw the difference, tweaked them, did it again. And like you said, it was an iterative process. What I also discovered was sometimes, even though I gave certain instructions, and even though the LLM very explicitly stated that it was following those instructions, it still didn't fully.
Yeah, and this is where having examples, like if the rules match what your code already does, then it'll be better at doing that, because it'll both have the English language to explain it and an example of what it actually looks like. So you're right. Sometimes when you're just writing in English, it won't always get it. You actually need a file that's written with that style. You can show it to be like, no, do it like this.
So for example, for me, it was, I wanted it to not introduce in any ESLint errors or warnings.
Well, that's hard, because it has to know what your ESLint configuration is.
Yeah, and I obviously gave it the path to the ESLint configuration, and it would literally say, I found some ESLint issues, I'm fixing them, and then I found some more, I'm fixing them. And even then, when it was all done, it still had some ESLint issues. So
yeah, and that's because you're putting a tool in the middle that it has to understand well enough to be able to do that, instead of just it knowing enough about code in general to know like what import versus require is. Anytime you're adding in these extra tools and extra layers of indirection, that it's more chances for the LLM to get confused and do stuff wrong.
Yeah, because it has to know about ESLint in its latent space, because you're not teaching it.
So if you had a doc or an ESLint, file that actually has ESLint context and explains what the ESLint stuff means and your configuration, how that maps to ESLint and how it works, that would be an additional piece of context you could give it that would help it figure that out.
Right. Then you are teaching it how to do that.
Yeah.
So I have a question, because you guys are talking about rule files, and this is something that I haven't really used. Typically, I'm getting in and I'm saying, look, I want you to do this. I want you to use these tools. I want you to, and yeah, I have to keep reminding it when I'm doing the code. So where do you put those into your tools?
For me, everything goes through RepoMix. So this is a huge part of my tool base. And if you're using Cursor, you won't do this. You won't have this workflow at all. But for me, I just have literally the way RepoMix works. You can just have a separate markdown file with your rules written in it. It just grabs it and appends it. I have a custom script that does a whole bunch of crap, but it's just a hunk of markdown is all it is, and that gets added to the project context that RepoMix creates for me.
And that's essentially the same way that it works in Cursor, just takes it from a different location. And the whole point is exactly what you said, Chuck, to avoid needing to manually put those in the same stuff in the prompt again and again and again each and every time.
Right. Yeah, and it's usually the ongoing stuff, right? So it's, just to remind, no, I'm using Tailwind 4, not Tailwind 3, right? Or
first of all, I'm using Tailwind. First of all, I'm using Tailwind rather than, let's say, CSS. It might figure it out from your existing content, or it might not. Or if you're starting a new project, then how would it know? So you would need to remember to tell it use Tailwind. But if you put it in your rule file, you don't need to remember that.
This also gets into something about conversation length. The longer you talk to an LLM in a single conversation, the dumber it will get. This is something that's highly unintuitive that a lot of people do not understand about LLMs. That's why I like RepoMix, because every time I'm making a change, I am kind of one-shotting it, getting code back. If it doesn't work, I'll have a very quick back and forth to fix the bug, and then I'm immediately going to go to a new context, a new conversation every time.
So that was the thing that I wanted to bring up with RepoMix, and I was going to ask earlier, but you kind of already answered it by saying RepoMix, and that is like when I'm starting out, it can kind of keep most of the app in the context, but as I build more things in, it obviously gets to the point where it can't.
Yeah, so RepoMix lets you ignore like test files and things like that. You can configure it to say, I just want my front end files to be in this configuration and my back end files to be in this. So if you have an app that gets very, very large, you can start to scope it to different sections that will have the context it needs to make the change you want to make.
So do you have to tell it I'm working in this section of code and so only care about, because that's what I'm wondering. What are the limitations on it?
I have a script where I create a bunch of different configurations that allow RepoMix to generate different types of context, and then I'll just run a command like repo back for my backend or something. There's a lot of ways which you can configure it in terms of how many different ways you need to configure it. Will kind of depend on how large your project is and how many different sections there are and how easily it will get confused if you give it the whole project versus just the parts of the project it needs. But since I'm vibe coding it, every time I want a repo mix command, I just give it my code and say, hey, I want this repo mix command to cover this part of my project. It gives me the new command.
Okay.
You mentioned before that the LLM gets dumber the longer the conversation continues.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So that's just because of what context length itself is. Context length basically means that there's a certain number of tokens that the LLM is able to kind of keep in its like working memory. And at a certain point, as it gets longer and longer and longer, it'll get full. So we'll have to start bumping off text from the beginning. And then that means it will lose important context. If it made some changes at the very beginning, and then you get to a very long conversation, it won't be able to be aware of those at the very beginning. So that's why you have to keep it within the LLM's context window, not just for the first message, so it doesn't say, this is too long, I can't respond. So it doesn't then, Claude actually does something smart. Claude will tell you at a certain point in time when your conversation is done, and they will not let you keep using it. They'll tell you have to create a new chat. I'm not sure if any of the LLMs do that right now. Most of them just let you keep going forever. And then it will just be, that's where you get the hallucinations. That's where you get a lot of these errors people think about when they think of LLMs, is once you exceed the context window in your conversation.
So it's basically to a certain point in time, you're kind of getting lost in the weeds, as it were, with all the noise that accumulated throughout that entire conversation, all the dead ends and wrong paths remain in the context and actually bump out the more important stuff that you probably gave at the very beginning of the conversation, as you said, like the goal that you're working towards, etc. By the way, we have a question from the audience. Does he always try all three models, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT? Which one tends to work best for which types of code?
Sure. So I will switch to different models if the first one I tried isn't working. Like if it gives me broken code and then I tell it to fix it and it gives me code that's still broken in the same way or broken in a different way. I treat most of these things pretty pragmatically. And the question more so is like, so what's, because if you do all three, you have to then check all three. And if they all work, then you just wasted, a ton of time. The bigger question is, which one do you start with? Which is one that's most likely to give you the correct answer the first time, so you don't have to use another model. And that has changed a lot for me over time. I'm constantly kind of switching back and forth as new models come out, because the space is so competitive right now that almost no one is able to hold on to the best model for more than a couple months. So my go-to right now is Claude for Sonnet, not Claude for Opus. This is a rare case where this quote unquote best, biggest, newest model is not really the best. Sonnet is better than Opus because one, it has a longer context window, which I don't know why they made Opus a smaller context window. It also is slightly faster, and it just doesn't have as many doesn't seem to have as much downtime. There's one time where Opus was broken, and then I realized I could just switch to Sonnet, and Sonnet wasn't. So sometimes if Claude is down, a Claude model is down, not Claude the whole thing. So anyway, Claude for Sonnet is my go-to right now. Then if that doesn't work, I'll try Gemini 2.5. And then if that doesn't work, I'll try ChatGPT.
Yeah, same for me. We're starting with Claude Sonnet.
Yeah, I just kind of start with whatever I'm sitting on, and then I'll just change it when I need to.
Oh, that's Ishan.
So I don't start with any one of them. I just rotate. It's like, this isn't doing as well. And I also don't follow along so much with there's a new model out, I want to try it. I'll wind up switching to it when it's like, okay, for whatever reason, this isn't doing what I want. My question, though, is how much are you paying for this? Because as you use the different models, you typically have to pay. Some of them it's per usage, right? So it's like, I put so many tokens in, or, whatever.
They're usually only usage based if you're using the API. It's usage based in the sense that you need to buy more expensive monthly subscriptions to get higher usage caps. So I'm not literally paying by the token, but and a lot of this will have to do with just how much do you use it, how much code do you write, and is that code that you're writing work related or not? So you can get away. I think most people, they should start by getting the $20 subscription to whatever LLM they're using, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. And then if you find it is useful for you, but you're hitting the usage limit, then look at some of the more expensive ones. Claude has a $100 one and then a $200 one where you can get 5x more usage or 20x more usage. I think ChatGPT just has the $200 plan where you get essentially unlimited usage. I've never hit the usage cap on ChatGPT. So I pay $200 for both of those because I'm building an app that is going to like be my full-time income hopefully one day, so I can kind of justify that cost. If you're someone who's just learning these things or just starting out, I would recommend just starting with a $20 a month one. I definitely recommend not using the free plan. If the free plan does not give you the best model, you want to have the best model, even if it's $20 a month.
And there's a reason that NVIDIA is now worth $4 trillion.
Seriously. Yeah.
So for new folks, there are a couple of things we've kind of thrown in here that I want to explain. One of them is tokens. Tokens are essentially words or parts of words that give meaning to the context. And the context is what the LLM remembers about your conversation. And so it breaks it up into tokens and then it figures out what it means. The other one is Dan's reference to NVIDIA going up. A lot of these models are trained using GPUs, and NVIDIA is the largest maker of the best GPUs for the training for these. And so as you get bigger and bigger models and more information crammed into them, they need more machines with more GPUs to feed the data in so that they can build these models. You can run them on your own machine, and a lot of times it will take advantage of your GPU and your computer, which is probably also made by NVIDIA. But at the end of the day, that's why, is because they're buying the GPUs like candy, because in order to get a bigger, stronger model, they need more hardware.
Or put another way, all that money that's coming from both us as users and from the VCs is all flowing downstream into NVIDIA's pockets.
Right. Yeah, because they're basically the big or only game in town for the hardware you need.
Yeah. Well, they always say in a gold rush, you want to be selling shovels. That's probably the best example of that.
Is what are you building and what's kind of your workflow as you build it out, and then related to that, what do you find that is working or not working in that workflow?
Yeah, so I'm building something called AutoShow. It's autoshow.app. If you want the latest, go to dev.autoshow.app. If you're someone watching right now, I just can't wait. That will be in upstream by the end of today, hopefully. But it's something that I first built for myself, just kind of as a personal tool that I thought would be useful. I explained it very briefly at the beginning, where I wanted to take my podcast, so I'm a podcaster like you guys. I do lots of live streams as well. And I wanted to be able to get an LLM to write the chapter titles for me. If most people, if they listen to a podcast, like your Lex Friedman's or your Joe Rogan's or whatever, you'll get, actually Joe Rogan doesn't do this, but Lex does. You get chapter titles and timestamps for each. So you can click to a certain point and it'll jump to that point in the conversation. And you can kind of read that over and get a sense of what is the guest going to talk about on this show. But that takes a lot of time. If you have a 3-hour podcast, you gotta listen to the whole thing and find those times. So I found that if I used Whisper, which is OpenAI's open source transcription model, which gives you the transcription and the timestamp for each line, I could give that to ChatGPT and say, hey, I want chapter titles, read this, chunk it up into topics, and then give me where the topic starts. And that was the first thing I did. And I was like, wow, like just that alone saves me a lot of time and it is very useful. So then I created a scripting workflow to do all that myself instead of running Whisper, copy pasting the transcription into ChatGPT, writing the prompt or, saving the prompt somewhere on my computer and copy pasting it and then giving it to the LLM and then getting the output back. I created just a command or CLI to do all those steps for me. So you would write npm run AutoShow, give it the URL, and then you would have the full show notes in without doing any other effort. So I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I started expanding it out. I started adding more prompts, things like summarize the whole episode or give me the key takeaways or write frequently asked questions based on this or write a rap song based on this or write a blog post based on this. I just kept adding more and more prompts and more things it could do. And then I was like, okay, I need to. So then I started showing it to people. I'd go on streams with my friends. And I'd be like, hey, look at this thing I built. And after showing it to people, I just kept getting told over and over and over again. People would be like, dude, you should charge for this. And I'm like, okay, well, if people really think it's useful, they think it could be a useful app, then I should try and productize this. So I've been working on building the front end and the back end so that there'd be kind of a nice user interface that people could use. And so now you have a clicking interface. You can just drop in a link to the YouTube video you want or upload a local file from your computer. You select the transcription service you want, you select the prompts you want, and then you select the LLM you want, and then it gives you the show notes back. So yeah, that's the app. It's the first thing we built that's like a whole product.
So before we're going too much farther, I want to say comparing us to Joe Rogan was a very appropriate comparison, I think.
Of course, right.
I mean, you guys are the JavaScript podcast in my mind. At least.
He's almost as pretty as we are.
Yeah.
You guys started around the same time.
Yeah. So with these tools, I mean, I've used some tools that do some of the things you talked about, not all of them.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear.
But yeah, yeah. And then the other thing I was going to point out is I'm actually working on kind of the other end of things where I want kind of a podcast assistant. Of course, I plan to monetize the platform that we host the shows on, but I want to build an LLM based system in there where it's like, hey, this is how we do the scheduling. Can you schedule an episode with so-and-so? Can you invite them to the podcast? Can you, they said they want to talk about vibe coding. Can you give me 3 or 4 resources that I can go check out before the episode in order to talk to?
Cool. I can help you build that if you want.
Right.
Let's talk afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. And so it's funny because the two kind of, they kind of blend in the middle. What I think. Yeah. And the other thing that'd be interesting is then, can I license AutoShow? Right. And so it's like, hey, for all of the process stuff on the other end, instead of building it myself, say, hey, we're going to send your episode over to AutoShow and we're going to get all the metadata back that we need in order to publish it. And so a lot of that anyway, it'd be really interesting to kind of compare notes and see where this is going. I'm doing most of mine in Ruby, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it would just be a back-end endpoint that you could, hit and access if you wanted to just use the AutoShow part. But yeah, there's only reasons why I like having so many friends who are content creators and why I like going on their shows and explaining it to them, because most people are like, hey, I could use that.
Yeah, I've thought seriously about doing that stuff, but I want to focus on the other stuff because that's where I spend most of my time. And so, yeah, if you'll do the other stuff, it's like, cool. Yeah.
And so a question about that. So you're building this whole thing, as you said, using vibe coding. If you were to have done it 3 years ago, you would have probably written it manually by hand.
Yeah.
How much of a difference has the vibe coding aspect of it made?
It just completely accelerates. Like, it makes such a huge difference in terms of the speed at which I could build new features, new functionality, fix bugs. It's just a huge accelerator, because you think about all the things you had to do when you didn't have these. You would have to figure out what you want to do, what tech you're going to use. You have to go to their docs. You have to then try it out. I mean, if you get to the point where you know all your tools, you're already very experienced with it, then you're just, writing the code. But even then, you have to figure out what the feature you want is, how you're going to implement it. You have to then write all the code to implement it. You then have to test it. You have to write new code if it's broken. So for me, it's just a huge accelerator. And as I've done it more and more, and I've learned how to do it more efficiently, how to, anticipate the weaknesses it has and how to mitigate those, I've continued to accelerate my development speed even more as I've been continuing to do this. So yeah, I just think it doesn't necessarily make you a better dev, but it makes you a much faster dev.
So the thing that I can see people thinking is, are people going to lose their jobs because of this?
Well, no, because there still had to be me to think of the app, to then prompt it to build the app, and then test it to use the app.
Yeah,
I mean, but I don't know.
My employer could hire me to use tools like this and not have to hire 2 or 3 other people, maybe. Or it may get to that point.
Yeah, or it's a question of, but if they then have success and they're making money and they want to do more things, then they'll have to hire more devs, even if they're AI enabled. I think that it's kind of like an economics question. Will there be a point where people will be like, well, I'm making enough money, so instead of trying to expand and make more money, I'm just going to keep making the money I make and then cut workers. I just don't think that's really how it happens in practice. I think in individual cases, companies may make that decision, but on like the scale of the whole economy, it's just hasn't how it's happened throughout history. So this could be different. I'm definitely not saying that that's not possible, but I think if you look at technological advances throughout history, that has never happened before.
There's another aspect here, and that goes to the whole testing aspect of it. Think about it. I'll give a different analogy. Now, like you said, this might change.
In the loop.
Yeah, you think about pilots with the autopilot. I mean, if you think about pilots flying a plane, commercial jet, the autopilot does like 90-something% of the actual flying. People don't know, but even the takeoffs and landings these days are pretty much automated. But that does not mean you don't want a pilot in the plane's cockpit, because occasionally you have situations that the autopilot can't properly handle, and you want a person in the loop. And likewise,
I've never heard that example before, but that's perfect. I'm going to start using that.
Well, I mean,
I'm going to charge you for that.
This past weekend, I got a chance to drive a Tesla, and the guy who owned it was a friend of mine. And he's like, "Dude, check this out." And he said it on autopilot, he was driving and steering and stuff, but it says right there on the screen, "Be there ready in case something happens." Right? You don't just sit back and take a nap and okay, wake me up when we get to where we're going, because something could obviously happen. So, as you were talking, that's how I'm thinking it. It's doing a lot for you, but you're still there sort of keeping your eye on it, make sure it's
and
doing
if
the right
it's
thing,
be there ready, sorry, I don't want it, because I'd be much more stressed out having my hands hanging over the wheel rather than simply just holding the wheel. I don't know, but
well, my thinking on this is much more in line with what Anthony explained. And I asked the question because I want to hear what he thinks. I don't want to tell him what I think and then go, "Do you agree?"
Well, I already know what you think.
But
just know you and your ideology.
Right. But I look at it, and a lot of the other technological advances that we've seen where people were like, you're going to put people out of work because you automated a factory, right? With an assembly line, or with robots or tools or things. I mean, in some of those cases, with the physical products, I mean, yeah, you're only going to sell so many widgets. And so, right, yeah, you kind of see that there. But with a lot of the other technological advances, and especially in software, my experience has been that our backlog is longer than we can do in 50 years, right? We've got a zillion things that we want to put in there, try out, run with, whatever. And so now if you've got developers that cost you more or less what they cost you anyway, and you can give them these tools to accelerate, you just wind up doing more things, more than you wind up laying people off. Right, that may not always happen in every case, right? There may be people that go, you know what, we've cornered this market, we're pretty comfortable where we're at. And so, yeah, they wind up doing the other thing. But my experience is that the cost of making software that does what people need is going to wind up going down, and that's going to reflect into all of the other areas of economy. And the companies that fail to innovate with this stuff are going to wind up getting left behind. And so you're not going to let people go. Yeah, you're going to accelerate all the people you have and make them way more efficient so that you can stay competitive.
Also, look, do I think that we might eventually get to a point, I don't know when it will be, people talk about AGI and stuff like that, where you don't need a person in the loop? Maybe, but when that happens, it won't stop at software. So if you're saying, your job is at risk, well, I could argue that eventually every job is at risk.
Even still, who made the LLM then?
And
these things aren't magic. They come out of nothing.
No, the previous LLM at a certain point in time.
If you're talking about AGI, that's actually a different animal than what we're dealing with here, where it's more capable of actually making decisions, where right now the LLMs, they kind of do need a human running them. And so the idea of an AGI or a superhuman intelligence, the idea behind those is that you don't need the human behind them. And we're just not there yet. It's a different thing.
I do think that it is changing what it means to be a developer and the skill set associated with it.
Definitely. Oh, absolutely.
Although, again, I'm not exactly 100% sure in exactly how. Because like you said, at the end of the day, for example, Anthony, you said you're still going into the code and fixing various things by hand. Now, maybe with better models, you would do it less frequently, but you still kind of need to be able to do it. It's also interesting for me that at the end of the day, we are generating code in React or generating code in Solid. And you have to kind of to ask, like, why? If at a certain point in time, if it's not the person interacting with the code, why does it need to even be human readable code?
Well, it needs to be something the browser can interpret. That's going to be the thing. You'll never be able to go beyond that if you're building for the web, or the platform you're building with will kind of define. Unless the platforms change and start accepting English language, then have them spin up code on the spot to do it.
Yeah, probably that's
not a lot of issues.
That's probably not energy efficient. Once you have the task worked out, you probably want something more automated.
I'm just glad we all agree now that React is the only thing we'll ever write for the rest of our lives.
Because
they're still paying me to write Rails.
We did have an interesting conversation recently about the fact that eventually you might get to a point in time where, if you're talking about an agentic web, kind of like, think about Google now, where you put in a query in Google, and instead of necessarily the search result, you're looking at what Gemini generates for you. And currently what Gemini generates is mostly text, but you could theoretically think about the future where Gemini effectively generates a web page for you based on what you requested.
Yeah. Hang on. I've got to take off, so I'll let Anthony answer, but I've got to go. So yeah, real interesting to see how this wraps up.
Awesome.
Bye, guys. So Anthony, now it's going to be just the two of us, I guess.
Yeah. It's all good. I always love talking to you, Dan.
Same here.
Where are you working these days?
We're taking a detour. We still have audience, so just so you know. This is not a private conversation. I'm actually working for the past year. I've left the previous company that I worked at, Next Insurance, about a year ago. By the way, they just recently got sold, which is nice because I kept my stock.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm working at a company called SciSense, which does analytics, and we are very much impacted by AI, both in the development process. We are kind of doing the AI revolution inside. Like basically, management gave a mandate that all development, I won't say it's vibe coded, we're not there yet, but all development is now AI assisted and even AI driven.
That's super interesting. So this is relevant to the conversation then.
Yeah, for sure. So for example, all the TypeScript / JavaScript development, because we still have some legacy stuff even written in JavaScript, all of that stuff is now being done with Cursor. Interestingly, a lot of our backend is implemented in Java, and the Java people are having a hard time with it. They've tried to use Cursor, and it's not, I don't know exactly why. I haven't looked into it personally, but they're having.
I can tell you exactly why. Because the models weren't trained on Java; they were trained on Python and JavaScript code.
But I think it's even beyond that. They're even getting, Cursor is essentially VS Code with stuff, and they're getting it. They're facing all sorts of challenges to work with the Java tooling stuff, like Maven.
The Java tooling is all defined for IntelliJ.
Yeah, stuff like that. So they literally even had, some of the developers literally tried to work by having both IntelliJ and Cursor open at the same time, work in Cursor, but do all the builds from IntelliJ and, having them sync, and they're not having fun.
Yeah, well, that's how I always felt when I had to write Java. So now you know how the rest of us felt.
Well, look, I've gone through all the programming languages, just so you know.
And Java's the worst, right?
No comment.
I don't hear Java's the best.
Well, let's put it this way. When I moved I had a certain stint using Visual Basic, and moving from Visual Basic to Java was actually a pleasurable move. Because I prefer the curly bracket syntax over, if and stuff like that. But going back to our original topic, So you're saying that, let me put it bluntly, would you have been able to do this project without this whole AI assistant development?
Probably not. I would say because, it's kind of a question of I could, but it would have taken so long that almost wouldn't have been worth it for me to do it. So I do think it has been a step change in enabling me to build stuff that would have been very challenging for me to have built in the past in a reasonable amount of time. And this is partly, I'll fully admit this, partly to do with my level of experience. I didn't start coding until my late 20s. I've been a professional dev for about 5 years now. Someone who has been a professional dev for 15 years, it'll be very different in terms of what an LLM enables them to do before and after. I think it will speed them up if they use it correctly, but it will be less of a thing where it will be a step change in enabling them to build brand new stuff. And there's academic research to support this that shows people who are, junior to intermediate gain the most from LLMs. That's not just in software development. That's across all like legal work and stuff like that.
So I'm having an interesting experience right now. As I mentioned, we're using it with a lot of existing legacy projects. So, for example, we have a legacy project which is implemented in JavaScript with React and class components. And in manually transitioning from class components to functional components and hooks is, well, it's labor intensive and but fairly boring. Not a lot of creativity involved in that. Let's put it this way. And it's definitely something that you can tell an LLM to do. You'll probably need to fix the results, but maybe
have
do
really
it kind of
robust tests. Going back to the testing
well,
conversation.
obviously, whenever you're doing refactoring, well, let's put it this way: when you're doing refactoring, it doesn't really matter what you're using, manually or LLM or whatever. You need to have robust tests as a baseline. You can't. I would never start a significant refactor without good test coverage. But it's really effort intensive to do this kind of thing, labor intensive, and it's not very interesting work. It's not very rewarding work. So if you can jumpstart this process with an LLM, that's a significant upside. So it's not just for let's vibe code a new project. From my perspective, it's also very, very useful when it's let's refactor an existing project and get it to where we would like it to be, something that otherwise might be so labor intensive that we might never actually do it.
No, I totally agree. I've told people the same thing, and I think this may be finally the point in time we can like rewrite all those COBOL apps, or get off of Java so that you could then have a better dev experience with LLMs. So I agree. Refactors now you can do a lot larger refactors a lot faster with LLMs for sure.
That'll be interesting. Telling an LLM, here's a Java application, rewrite it in Node or something like that, and see what happens.
Yeah, that would be hard. The React class components to functional components would be a little easier because you can do, bits and pieces at a time. But if you just have to switch the entire language, you almost have to refactor like the entire thing.
Yeah, that is true. But an interesting point that you raised about being an experienced rather than a relatively less experienced developer. I can see it working both in favor and against both types of developers. Like, let's consider the junior developer. On the one hand, you might say that using an LLM, that if you've got a team, that let's say in the past you might have a team with one senior developers and two juniors. Well, now you might just give the senior an LLM and tell them you don't need the juniors anymore. You can effectively get the LLM to do the junior stuff for you. And then you're going back to Chuck's question before, you're potentially undercutting the work of junior developers. Do you think there's a risk of that?
Potentially. It's I think it'll be an economic question for the company. Do they get more value out of having their senior dev have an LLM do the junior dev work, or would it be better to have the two junior devs use an LLM and get closer to senior work? Because then you would have, you think of it as having a senior and 2 half seniors.
But you would still need the senior, or could you? So it works both ways. It could be maybe I just keep the senior and have the LLM instead of the 2 juniors, or maybe I could have the 2 juniors working as semi-seniors and doing without the
Sure, I guess
senior, or maybe with fewer seniors.
that gets back to what Chuck said, though, is that you do have a finite amount of work for them to do, or is it once they've done their work, you have more work for them to do, in which case having more means you could do more work.
My opinion, by the way, is that you would still need the senior, but for a slightly different thing. Like what from my perspective, at the core of software development is the ability to take complex problems and break them down into several simpler problems that you can then take
Test along the way.
the results and mush them together and get the solution for the original complex problem. And you do this recursively or iteratively until you get to such simple problems that are relatively straightforward to implement. And even if you're using an LLM, you'd still need to have a person kind of driving this process. I mean, think about you developing your app. You couldn't tell the LLM, here's my idea, now go develop an app for it and do all the development process and just send me a text when you're done. Again, maybe we'll get there one day, but we're totally not there yet. So that's what I think you need the seniors for. And in a lot of ways, that's what you need the seniors for with juniors anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think what the argument you're making and what I agree with is that seniors are probably going to be sticking around. If people are being replaced because of LLMs, that's going to be harder to break in if you're a junior.
Which will raise an issue for the industry, because if you don't have juniors, where will the seniors come from?
Yeah.
So how do you know when you're vibe coding? How do you know when you're done?
Well, for me, it's just, have I built the feature that I wanted to build? Like you were talking about how the point of the senior is to kind of have this vision. What is the problem you're trying to solve, and how do you get there? So for me, it's like I first had this initial vision of a workflow I wanted where I could generate show notes without any manual steps along the way. And then from there, I've just been adding on more features. Like, I wanted to be able to work with not just audio files, but also video files so it can extract the audio, or I want additional prompts so it could do more, or, I want to be able to run it twice on different LLMs, or, once it gives me the output, I then want to run text to speech so I can listen to the show notes, or I want to now generate a cover image, so I need to connect it to an image
Maybe
model.
You should just release it.
Going. Well, it is released. That's what I'm saying.
It is released.
Yeah,
right. You said.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
people can use it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So obviously, I think you're right. You gave the link both to the production version and to the development version that people can try out.
Yeah, people should go to. I could screen share and I can show you if you want.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do it quickly. Although, again, if for people listening on the podcast,
I'll speak through what's kind of happening. So let's it'll be quick. It won't take me very long to kind of go through it. So you have interface where you just start by
before
selecting.
You continue, to our listeners, again, Anthony will be describing what he's showing, but if you really want to see, you can always you'll be able to find the video on YouTube, because we always release the episodes also on YouTube as actual videos as well.
Yep. And then how do I get this off screen? Are you able to see the Riverside thing right now?
Yeah, yes, I am.
Okay, I'll
just drag it a little bit. Yeah, like that.
Okay, great. So you start with selecting either a file from your computer, or you give a video URL link. It doesn't just have to be YouTube. It could be something like Twitch or Vimeo. Any kind of service works. And then after you select the thing you want to process, that's good. Yeah. Then it gives you the available transcription services, and you select which one you want. There's a credit system. So depending on whether you use a more expensive transcription model versus cheaper, you'll have different credit options. And it's just per usage. So there's no subscription. It's pretty simple. After you select your transcription service, you select the prompt you want to use. There's a ton of prompts right now. Things based around content, so different length summaries and chapters. You can pull out quotes. You can create social media posts, blog posts. You can do business-related stuff, create email campaign series, press releases. You can do creative stuff like songs and short stories. You can create educational material, and then stuff like personal and professional development. So I'm going to add, when you hover over them, it will show you a quick preview of each so you can kind of tell what it's actually going to give you. That's just something I haven't done quite yet. Then you'll select your LLM. Do you have a question?
No, just a thought or suggestion that eventually you may want to implement some sort of a plugin mechanism, which will make it both easier for you to add new features without having to release new versions, but also make it possible for third parties to add their own plugins into your system.
So what would be a plugin that would?
Like all those services that you showed before would be plugins.
Okay. But that would still have to, something would have to deploy them. And then
yeah, they would need to be somehow deployed securely into your system. I'm not saying that it's trivial, but it would make the system a lot more extensible. Both make it, generally speaking, whenever something is a service that you can invoke from your system, you should always think about whether that can or should be a plugin, because it kind of decouples the infrastructure itself from that particular type of processing, and also again makes it possible for somebody else to effectively extend your system. Now then you get into other interesting questions about what, like you said, how do I do something like that securely? How do I prevent data leaks? How do I monetize it? Stuff like that. But it opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, and I am planning on having the kind of back-end API of this be exposed to other people, like someone like Chuck. If he wants to use this, he wouldn't have to go straight through the front-end flow.
The API, yeah. But that's using you as a service. I'm talking about you using other services to perform particular operations.
Yeah, it's possible for sure.
So one of the issues that I recall people bringing up, when people had no experience in software development at all, vibe coded like services that they actually sold or provided, they ran into all sorts of security issues, like silly things like putting the AWS keys in the front end code or stuff like that. Because obviously the LLM doesn't care. How do you, given that you effectively are not writing a lot of the code that you're generating, how are you preventing these sort of things from happening?
Yeah. So can I actually finish the flow first and then I'll answer?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's all good. So then you select the model you want. We have ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, and then it gives you the show notes. This styling needs to be fixed. It'll be a little nicer. I actually ran this on a JavaScript Jam's first episode, so we can kind of see what the output is. So we see here we have an episode summary. I'll just read like the first sentence. This inaugural episode of JavaScript Jabber introduces the podcast and panel members featuring AJ O'Neill, Peter Cooper, Jameson Dance, and Charles Max Wood.
They're old school guys.
Yeah, and then it gives you the chapters. And then if you keep scrolling, you'll see the prompt that gave it to you. When I first shared this with my friend Scott, he thought that was a mistake. He's like, you're showing people the prompt, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, I want them to see the prompt that was used to generate. He's like, but that's the secret sauce. Why would they use your service when they could just use the prompt? And I kind of get where they're coming from, but there's all this other stuff beyond the prompt that the app does. Like it's the uses that it processes the video and connects to a transcription service and connects to an LLM service and does the whole thing. So I think there's still value to the app, even if you do include the prompt. That might be a different.
I agree, because also people use these sort of things in order to save time and effort. if they could copy the prompt and they could get some of the functionality, but at a significant expense of time and effort. The process would certainly not be as streamlined.
Yeah.
So for sure.
And then this is a bug. The transcript should be here. So that's something for me to fix. And so the transcript will be included along with the show notes. And then you can see some configuration, like what model did you use? How many credits did it cost you? And then metadata includes like the title, the YouTube link it came from, the YouTube channel it's connected to. You can see the cover image from the show as well. So a lot of this you could kind of take, and you could turn this straight into like a markdown file with front matter that can be a web page for each of your episodes or something. That's kind of what I do on my website for all of my videos I do.
It seems that LLMs have really been revolutionary for content creators. And that's yet another great example. Like at the end of the day, it's a person creating the content, but it's the LLM doing a lot of the chores and all these sort of things around the actual content, stuff that otherwise would have taken away time that could have been spent creating even more content.
Yep. Yeah. So going back to your security question. So for me, I do have enough experience to know basic security things like don't put API keys in your front end, stuff like that. So that is where, just having some sort of dev experience obviously comes in handy. If you're not a dev at all and you're trying to launch a whole app, that is very risky. And I would recommend trying to find someone you could pay some sort of small amount of money to at least do a very, very baseline security check for you. If you can't do that, spend a lot of time prompting your LLM to have it give you instructions for security testing your app. So for higher level stuff like cross-site scripting and stuff like that, I am in the process right now of kind of hardening the application. I didn't roll my own auth and I didn't roll my own payments. So that also I'm kind of leaning on the services to do some security for me, banking on Clerk and Stripe handling, their end of the security, and that I have to just make sure that the app itself can't get hacked. So someone could then have access to like your credits and your credit card that's attached to Stripe and things like that.
And the main advantage is obviously, aside from, reducing that effort, is the fact that there are a lot of examples out there of people integrating with Clerk and with Stripe. So the LLM is not short of proper usage examples.
Yeah, totally. And this raises the value of these third-party services and leans even further into the don't roll your own auth kind of argument, which I see both sides of for sure. I'm not saying no one should ever roll their own auth, but for me and what I'm doing, what I'm building, it definitely makes more sense for me not to roll my.
Okay, then we are running towards the end of the show. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to say either about the service you created or about vibe coding in general, or anything that we might have missed?
Yeah, I mean, I just encourage devs or even non-devs to try and work with LLMs as much as they can and try and really understand how they work, what you can do with them to get the most out of them, what their weaknesses are. And a lot of this you're only really going to get through experience. I personally find it really fun. I'm having more fun developing now than I ever have. One of my friends was like, it's so boring to code LLM. You just sit there and wait for the LLM to write the code. And I'm just like, well, do some dishes in the middle. But that's what I do. I do chores while I code. I'll do a prompt, and as it's writing code, I'll do like a minute or two of chores and then come back to my computer. And that's kind of how
I reminds me of the old days when we would be running compilers like, I did a lot of coding in C++ and stuff like that. And in the old computers way back when, before we had the M1s, it would take a while to run, and we would sit there and surf the web or whatever while the compiler was running. So
what is that famous XKCD comic where two dudes sword fighting in the office, and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing?" They're like, "We're waiting for our code to compile." He's like, "Okay."
Yeah, I guess. So now we're waiting for the LLM to finish.
Yeah, no, I've made that same comparison actually for sure. So yeah, I would also say try out different models, see which ones you feel like work best for you. and don't feel like you have to like dive headfirst into the entire AI space. Really, the most important thing is just, finding a model that works for you and can be useful for you, and try and work it into like your day-to-day stuff, even if it's not coding. If you have some sort of other task that you feel like could be faster or automated, just throw it into an LLM and see what happens. And they're getting better all the time. They're connecting to more external services all the time. I would say don't worry about jumping into MCP yet. I think MCP is cool and it's going to be revolutionary, but it's super new and it's probably not something that people should really jump into unless they like working with new tech when it's kind of in changing, breaking states,
Yeah. Cool. So we usually have picks, but to be honest, I don't have any special pick today. Do you have anything that you would like to shout out as a pick before we finish?
I mean, the things I mentioned throughout the episode, Repo Mix is cool. Check out Claude, definitely, if you're looking to code. I think that's probably the best one right now in terms of, price and features and speed and all that. And then check out AutoShow. Let me know what you think. I just launched it like a week ago, so it's still pretty new. And there may be some bugs and things like that. Just hit me up online if any of that happens. I can give you some free credits to test it out if you want. I'm AJC Web Dev everywhere on the internet. X, YouTube, LinkedIn, GitHub. So yeah, check it out. Let me know if it's useful for you. Let me know if there's features you want me to build or prompts you want me to add. You'll have the ability to write your own custom prompts pretty soon if you don't want to use any of the regular prompts. And that's pretty much it.
Excellent. So Anthony, thank you very much for coming on the show. I think you shared a lot of super useful information. I think we're literally watching a revolution, and your case in point. So thank you again. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening in, and see you next time. Bye.